Hello again, friends. This is Mike, and welcome back to the Soul Unleashed podcast. This podcast is going to be about dealing with grief, and I just want to share some of the techniques that I used, 3 of them, in dealing with the loss of my relatives and how I found that helpful. Stand by. Hello again, friends and fellow truth seekers. Mike Nicholas here with another episode of the Soul Unleashed podcast, where my goal is to help you with questions you might have regarding the awakening of your soul, and particularly to help other left brain types, like I think I am, ask the right questions in our search for deeper meaning to life. Ultimately, I want to help you unleash your soul from limiting beliefs and smothering paradigms. So let's get started with today's discussion. I want to talk about grief, and what made me think about all this is I just recently went to Maine, drove up to Maine for a funeral, and it was for a friend. 3 of us rode up there, and it had to do with a gentleman who was a Masonic friend, and so it was important that we do something for him, and his family was wonderful. Everything went great. We performed a graveside ceremony there, and the family had it all set up great, and it was just really nice to meet the people. There wasn't a ton of crying. There was some there. Obviously, his siblings were very upset and got very emotional. And of course, I thought about how they were dealing with grief as they were going through that. And then I came back home, and for some reason, I was going through my journal. I use a journal to write to my son, and he's in spirit. And when I write down, I sometimes hear things come back. And anyway, I was reviewing some of the things I had written back in 2020. And it occurred to me that I could see now from the perspective of 4 years later how I was dealing with the grief from losing our son in 2020. I've mentioned in previous podcasts that our son Matt passed in late March of 2020. And it was during COVID. It was a real screwed up time, as most of you know. But anyway, in terms of dealing with grief, when you lose a loved one, what I'm going to share with you is what worked for me. Okay, I don't have a degree in grief counseling. I don't have a degree in social work. I'm not a medical professional. But I just want to share with you what I found helpful. And I've been through the loss of numerous relatives, right? I've lost my grandmother, my godmother, when I was, this was some time ago. I was in the room when she passed. I loved her very much. And I was in the room when my parents passed, my mother and my father. I was in the room when my mother-in-law passed. And I was with my father-in-law up to the last few minutes when he passed away. And so I've dealt with all that in terms of grief. But the most impactful to us, of course, was the loss of our son. And so I just wanted to explain what I did that I found that helpful when that happened. Now, you know, some of the things you can do immediately is you can go to grief counseling, and you've got loved ones. I'm not going to talk about that because I never went through any kind of grief counseling. And although we have a large family and there's a lot of loved ones involved, really we did not get a lot of that when our son passed. And that was really because of the pandemic, right? If you remember how fearful people were in late March of 2020, that's when everything was shutting down. That's when everybody was supposed to stay in their homes. You couldn't even see your grandchildren. It was just a really, really bad time. And so in fact, we didn't even see our son for the last couple of weeks of his life because he was in a facility where we couldn't even visit him. And so when he passed away, you know, we were with him when he passed away, actually in the hospital because he had a problem in the facility. But we didn't know all that was going on. It was a surprise to us, basically. So I'm not going to talk about grief counseling or getting comfort from your loved ones. That's kind of a given, I guess, if you're going through those kind of things. What I want to talk about are three things that I did that helped us. Now, I think most people worry about a few things when a loved one dies. One thing is that we want to know, are they happy? Are they happy where they are? Has their suffering ended? So when our son passed and when my father passed, my mother, they were suffering at the end. They were physically suffering. And I want to be sure that I want the reassurance that they were in a better place. And there's all kinds of, you know, religious connotation to that. Yes, they're with God, they're with the Lord, they're with Jesus, all that. And if you believe that, that's very comforting. But it would be nice to know if there was some type of confirmation that that was actually happening. And I'll talk about how I did that in a second. And then you also want to know if there's any kind of unfinished business that you wish was resolved before they passed. For some of us, we're estranged from our loved one who passed away, or there's some type of maybe something that happened towards the end of their life where you weren't happy or they weren't happy, or you said something or they said something. So you want to know if those kind of things were resolved. Now, wherever they are, does it still make a difference? Are they still angry at you? Have they forgiven you? Have you forgiven them? That kind of thing. And then the other thing I think about, especially with my experience with our son, is, does he still love us wherever he is? And can he still participate in what I'm doing, what we're doing, our lives today? So here are the three things that I wanted to recommend to you that worked for me. The first thing is to read. Now, I can see where reading might be a little bit difficult or be a challenge initially, especially when you're dealing with grief. But I wanted answers when our son passed. I wanted to know, what had happened to him, where he had gone, what other people experienced. And so the first thing I started doing was looking for books of other parents who had lost children. I found a book by a gentleman named Joe McQuillan. It's called My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. And Joe had lost his son. And so I related to the things he was saying and the feelings that he had. And if you lose someone close to you, I recommend that perhaps you look for a book. There's many, many out there of how people are dealing with the loss of someone similar maybe to your situation. Now, I was looking for things that had to do with spirituality. So I would recommend, if you're interested in that, and if you're listening to this podcast, I assume you are, I would look for books that deal with how maybe you communicate with someone that you love, or how you still maintain contact with them. Joe goes through that in his book. There's another great book by a lady named Priscilla Kersey. I'll put these in the show notes. It's called It Will All Make Sense When You're Dead, Messages from Our Loved Ones in the Spirit World. And I found that fascinating. And as I read these books, they kind of opened me up to accepting that maybe there was a way to get in touch with or communicate with our son. So he passed in March. I was reading these in July, August, throughout the summer. Another book by Rebecca Rosen is called Spirited, and basically unlock your psychic self and change your life. And Rebecca Rosen is a well-known kind of medium to the stars, and she goes through her experiences also and how that changed her. And then kind of this is a little more advanced, but there's a book out there by Brian Weiss called Many Lives, Many Masters. Brian Weiss is a doctor, a psychiatrist. He goes through how he went from being a psychiatrist to being surprised as he had people under hypnosis. They started talking about previous lives. All that was super fascinating to me. That's kind of a little more advanced stuff with Brian Weiss. Initially, I was just hurting and wanting to know that Matt was okay, and where was he, and what happened to him after he died, and was he still around? Those were the basic things I was involved in. But reading helped me crystallize kind of what I want to know, and they suggested things like the other two I'm going to mention to you here. So reading is one. The second thing is journaling. Now, journaling is, I guess, therapeutic for a lot of different reasons, but the way I used it was I wrote letters to Matt, and gradually I just started listening for what I was hearing back from him. And as you read some of these books, and especially the books by mediums, you'll understand that how this works, that you write and then you just listen. I can't really explain what happens when I do this. I write to Matt, and I things just come into my head. I don't really hear his voice, although if I try, I can hear the mannerisms that he used when he spoke. But it's generally just listening and writing stuff down. And you don't think about it too much. You just write what you think you hear. And sometimes it's pretty amazing things, at least in my experience. So that's the second thing is journaling. And the third thing is consider contacting or seeking out a medium. Now, a medium is someone who specializes in communicating with people who have passed. I know this is controversial, although for those of you listening to this podcast, probably not. But A medium is considered sinful by many religions. Other religions accept it quite easily. But for me, I was just looking for answers. I wasn't worried about religion. I wasn't worried about what people would think. I just wanted to know if I could get some kind of reassurance that Matt was okay. So reading those books I read, especially Joe McQuillan's book, he goes through all his experience with mediums, and I started thinking, man, this sounds like he's very happy. He's getting a lot out of this. Wonder if it would work for me. And so that's what I did. I went and contacted a medium. How do you find a medium? Well, I went and asked my sister for recommendation, and she knew someone, and that was our first medium. And then I went to Google. I just started Googling people, looking for mediums that were close to me. I thought at that point, just getting started with mediums, that it was important, that you had to be there with the person. I didn't know what to expect initially from a medium. I didn't know whether, they threw dried bones on the ground and used chicken blood droppings or what they did. But I thought you had to be in the room for whatever was happening, incense and candles and putting paint in your forehead. I didn't know what they did. But none of that happened. Even though it was the pandemic time, we saw our first medium. My wife and I went together in August of 2020. No idea what to expect. It was a wonderful experience. She said things and mentioned things that only Matt could have known. Now, you don't know with a medium who's going to come through, right? You don't know if your loved one that you want to hear from is actually going to come through. The medium can't, place a phone call or text, and reach out to a specific person in spirit. Generally, that person or that spirit knows that you're going to be there, and they're waiting for you, and then they come through when you're in the room. It's a pretty amazing thing. Now, I've done a lot of mediums now since I started this, and I know that you can't spirit are going through their own thing in spirit, right? They're first learning and they're recovering, and some of them have things they need to heal from in this life. And so they're generally not available for about 3 or 4 months after they pass, and then they're really available for maybe a year after that. And then they go on to other things. They're still there, but they may not come through as much as you'd like. Other people might come through. But during this phase of my life, shortly after Matt died, and about 6 to 8 months after he died, he came through a lot. And all the mediums that we were seeing were saying this, that they described Matt. I will tell you that a good medium will not ask you, who you're looking for, or will not ask you to describe who you're expecting. Now, at the end, sometimes a medium might say to you, is there anyone that you were expecting to be here that did not show up? And you could say, I was expecting my son or my brother or my father. And then the medium can maybe ask for that person to join. No guarantees, and that might happen. But back to our initial session with the first medium. So we went into this room. It was COVID. So even though we were there, she saw us, and we had our masks on, and she did a wonderful job. And we were profoundly helped by that experience. We were grateful that Matt came through. He said things that really brought us to tears, that made us realize that it was him. He also said things like, I mentioned earlier, you want to know whether people are still with you and they love you and they see what you're doing. Yes, he provided evidence that he had seen some things that had happened since he had died. There's no way that the medium could have known what she was saying. Actually, the medium usually doesn't know what she's even saying. She's just relating to you what she or he is seeing, and then you put the pieces together. Sometimes things don't even make sense that they are describing, and they'll make sense later. So it's good to take notes or get a recording of what you're doing. So anyway, we thought that it was necessary to see a medium that was close, and so that's why I went to Google. So the second one we saw, she was not doing in-person sessions because of COVID, and she saw us online through, I think it was FaceTime. I have to tell you that FaceTime, the second time with a medium, that second experience with a FaceTime medium was one of the most impactful ones that we had done. She was remote, obviously, but it was just amazing that the things that came to her and that she explained to us, and that really caused us to cry and to be happy, and after it was over, to be reassured that Matt was okay. He was no longer in pain. The things that I mentioned, right? We were sure he wasn't in pain. His suffering had ended. There was no unfinished business. In fact, he told us, in terms of unfinished business, not to pursue some action I was going to take against the facility when he passed away. I was convinced that it was due to negligence, that they had not responded to him, and so he was found unresponsive. The place was had a reputation for not having people respond that quickly, and I was very upset, of course, when he was taken to the hospital unresponsive. But I was sure it was because they didn't respond. And but Matt came through and said, do not pursue any kind of action like that. And so that those kind of things are helpful. They helped ease my anger, helped ease my anxiety, and just to be happy that he was okay. And he even commented about his, not in August, but a later medium, he commented about his funeral and the eulogies. So it's just, those are just three things that I'd recommend here just to close, that you consider doing if you're facing grief. I would never say, obviously it never goes away. I think about Matt every day. I miss him every day, but I feel much better. I have no anxiety about where he is or whether or not he's happy. I know he's happy. I know he's doing wonderful things wherever he is, and that he's still able to participate and see what's happening. And I can journal to him, I can write to him, I can hear from him, and I find all that tremendously helpful. So consider reading some of those books I mentioned, and there's many others. If you want to write to me, mike@mikenicholas.com, I'd be happy to suggest others to you. Journal, and there's other books out there about how to journal, and also consider finding a medium. I'd be happy to recommend a couple to you. I did sit for a session with Rebecca Rosen, but God bless her, she's tremendously expensive now. She's doing wonderful things, but Priscilla Kersey is amazing, and some other ones that we did also. So that's it for this podcast. Thank you for listening. I hope you find this a little bit helpful. Again, you can reach me at mike@mikenicholas.com, or my website is simply mikenicholas.com. And if you'd be kind enough to rate the podcast, it really helps people find this. I don't always appreciate how often that helps, but if you rate the podcast and maybe leave a comment, it makes it much easier for people to find me. Thank you very much. Look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.